Hello everyone, and welcome. This is your boy Cool Titanium 60, and today we're going to be talking about carbon capture. So carbon capture has started becoming a big topic as of late. And the reason for this is because of climate change. For those of you that don't know, climate change has been going on for the last several decades, and it's just about now that we're able to see the consequences of climate change with our own eyes. Our polar ice caps are melting, weather patterns are getting more extreme, and our ocean water levels are rising every day. Thanks to the Paris Agreement in 2015, countries around the world have recognized this irreversible damage from climate change and are acting quickly to fix this problem. Some of these solutions you are already seeing. Electric cars, trains, solar and wind power are just some of the many ways we are decreasing our carbon emissions. Some bigger things you may not know are the closure of coal power plants as well as the acceptance of carbon capture. For those of you who don't know, carbon capture is the overall term of just capturing carbon dioxide. There are many ways you can capture carbon dioxide, and the one we're discussing today is direct air capture. In direct air capture, you capture carbon dioxide using a solid or aqueous oxide inside of a big chamber with fans on both sides to bring in carbon dioxide saturated air. Current oxides that are currently used today in these processes are either potassium hydroxide or calcium hydroxide. Potassium hydroxide is a much more expensive compound used in carbon capture, and it sits at around $600 to $800 per metric ton, and is probably one of the reasons why carbon capture is not as widely used as it could be. The use of calcium hydroxide is still rather new, but is meant to be a much more affordable option at just under $100 per metric ton. We will be going more in depth over the use of calcium oxide, as this is starting to becoming more widely used across the globe. So using calcium hydroxide in direct air capture is the second generation iteration of carbon capture. In the first reaction, the carbon dioxide reacts with lime water, which is a solution of calcium hydroxide, to create a milky substance that contains calcium carbonate. The chemical equation is right here. So after this equation is done, you filter out the excess water so that you have just solid calcium carbonate. This calcium carbonate will further go through a process called calcium looping. And this is just a combination of two processes that can repeat theoretically forever. The reason why it's not theoretically is because the calcium oxide does deteriorate over time, so you do have to add in some more calcium hydroxide so that you can keep this process at the highest efficiency. So these two processes that are inside calcium looping are also known as calcination and carbonation. In calcination, this is the reaction of splitting calcium carbonate into carbon dioxide and calcium oxide. This process is known as an endothermic reaction, which is where you have to bring in heat to the chemical process for the reaction to occur. And this takes place inside of what's known as a calciner. So this calciner is just a steel cylinder that rotates inside a heated furnace that indirectly performs high temperature processing within a controlled atmosphere at temperatures ranging between 500 and 1100 degrees Celsius. In this endothermic reaction, calcium carbonate is heated to anywhere between 850 and 900 degrees Celsius. This almost pure carbon dioxide gas is then filtered for storage use. Carbonation is the reaction of combining calcium oxide with carbon dioxide to create calcium carbonate. The calcium oxide inside the calciner is moved out of the container and into a carbonator. This is just another cylinder that is used to then cool the calcium oxide to around 650 degrees Celsius, which is then brought in contact with a flue gas that contains a low to medium concentration of carbon dioxide. If you're doing pre-combustion or post-combustion carbon capture, they'll probably bring out the fume gases from said reaction, as let's say you're using coal or natural gas, so that it filters out the carbon dioxide. In direct air capture, they probably bring in more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as they're doing this. So the carbon dioxide from the air will then combine with the calcium oxide to form calcium carbonate until said flue gas is safe to emit into our atmosphere. And this is the chemical equation. The reason why there is one air going this way, one air going that way, is because of calcium looping, because you are able to recycle calcium oxide and calcium carbonate. The entropy of this reaction is going to equal to plus 178 kilojoules per mole. Those of you that don't know this, entropy is what's known as the heat of change in the reaction. If you're doing multiple reactions combined, it's just showing you need more heat or does it emit more? So to determine if this entire reaction is, well, endothermic or exothermic, you do have to look at the sign of the entropy. If the sign is positive, the whole process is endothermic, which means that you have to add E to the whole entire reaction. If the sign is negative, the whole process is exothermic, which means the reaction exerts more heat than it needs. With the calcium looping entropy having a positive sign, you do have to add more energy into the equation. Now, doing some simple but also very important math, you can determine how much energy in watt hours is needed to run said reaction. So to start off with, we do know that the molar mass of calcium carbonate is at about 100.09 grams per mole, and the molar mass of calcium hydroxide is 74.093 grams per mole. So if you take a look at our first equation where we combine calcium hydroxide and carbon dioxide, you convert the whole thing into metric tons. All you have to do is you can divide 1 million grams, which is equal to 1 metric ton, divided by the molar mass of calcium hydroxide, which is 74.093 grams per mole, which then you can calculate that for 1 metric ton of calcium hydroxide, there are 13,496.55 moles of calcium hydroxide. This means that we should have somewhere around 13,496.55 moles of calcium carbonate, since calcium hydroxide has a 1-to-1 molar relationship with calcium carbonate. What that means is for every mole of calcium hydroxide, it produces 1 mole of calcium carbonate. Now, what this further means is that for every metric ton of calcium hydroxide, you have now just produced 1,350,828.01 grams of calcium carbonate to be used in calcium looping, or about 1.35 metric tons of calcium carbonate. So since the molar mass of carbon dioxide is about 44.01 grams per mole, you can then multiply 44.01 grams per mole by the amount of moles that are in the calcium carbonate, which is the 13,496.55. You can theoretically capture about 593,983.237 grams of carbon dioxide in calcium looping. Now, in this whole reaction, again, there are 13,496.55 moles in the entire reaction, which means that since carbon oxide has a molar mass of 56.0774 grams per mole, you are then going to have exactly 56,851.524 grams of calcium oxide that will then be used to combine with the other carbon dioxide. That really is not a lot. What that's showing is for every metric ton of calcium hydroxide, you're not even capturing a full metric ton of carbon dioxide. And that's also one of the big downsides to this is it's not a complete one-to-one. Molar-wise, it is a one-to-one, but it's not a complete thing where for every metric ton of whatever hydroxide you're using, you then can capture 1 metric ton of carbon dioxide. Now, for the energy part, you are going to multiply the entropy, which is 178 kilojoules per mole. It doesn't matter about the sign on this one. You're trying to find the amount of energy. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. You're going to multiply the entropy by the amount of moles of calcium carbonate, which is 13,496.55 moles, which gets you a little over 3 billion joules. Now, the reason why I had this in joules, but the entropy is in kilojoules, is because to convert joules to watts, 1 watt is just 1 joule per second. So if you want to combine it into watt hours, you are then going to divide 3 billion joules by 3,600 to get about 850,309.092 watt hours. The reason why I divided by 3,600 is because there are 60 seconds in a minute and then 60 minutes in an hour. So there's about 3,600 seconds in an hour. So basically, in short terms, you're going to need at least 850 kilowatt hours of electricity to use 1 metric ton of calcium hydroxide to capture less than 0.6 of a metric ton of carbon dioxide. In Texas, there is a plant that is under construction that plans to capture 1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide every year. This means this plant is going to be capturing about 2,737.85 metric tons of carbon dioxide a day, or about 114 metric tons of carbon dioxide an hour. Just to power the reaction, you're going to need about 163 megawatt hours of electricity. Now, if you're wondering how I got that, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply the 850,309.092 watt hours to the 114.077 metric tons of carbon dioxide an hour. This 163 megawatt hours of electricity is only to complete 1 loop in the whole calcium loop for 1 hour. And this doesn't include electricity for any of the other portions portion of the facility that do need power. If you want to start with this amount of carbon dioxide, you're talking about using up 190 metric tons of calcium hydroxide every hour. This does also not factor in the whole calcium looping process. In theory, you could use maybe 190 metric tons of calcium hydroxide every month or every year. I honestly do not know how often you're gonna have to recycle out old and put in new calcium hydroxide. So if you want to add in calcium hydroxide at the very beginning of each reaction, just completely scrap carbon looping. You're talking about the need for over 1.667 million metric tons of calcium hydroxide. And with the price of calcium hydroxide being anywhere between $80 and $100 per metric ton, you're talking about spending anywhere between $133 and $167 million just on calcium hydroxide every year. All in all, carbon capture is still a relatively new technology that does have a lot of potential. You are going to have to spend a lot of money just building the facility, which is going to be anywhere from several hundred million to possibly a couple billion. Now, the big question is going to be, how in the world are we going to power this? With that, we're going to end this video right here. I do want to thank my friend Alec Miller for helping me do the research on this video. He was a lot of help. He did help me get some of the math equations that I have used here. He's also helped just make sure I get everything done. Thank you, Alec. You're a lot of help. Make sure you guys like and subscribe down below. As always, make sure you guys hit that bell icon so you don't miss any future videos. Tech videos every Monday, automotive videos every Wednesday, aviation videos every Friday. So hit that bell icon so you don't miss anything. And I hope you guys love the content. Peace.